The most expensive 50 cents ever spent. Jake Martinez stared at his computer screen in disbelief. The empty energy drink cans around his desk, testament to another sleepless night browsing the galactic internet. The translator plugin struggled with some of the alien languages, but the listing was clear enough. One genuine Zephyrian scout vessel, slightly used. Starting bid of 0.5 standard credits, 50 cents in human money. The ship looked like a metallic teardrop in the grainy photos, its hull gleaming with an otherworldly blue sheen. According to the specs, it was 40 meters long with a functional hyperspace drive, life support systems, and something called a molecular assembler that Jake assumed was fancy alien speak for a really good 3D printer. The seller's profile showed a creature that looked like a cross between an octopus and a business suit. Kethvar the Merchant, it read, with a reputation score that would make any eBay power seller weep with envy. The description was brief. Upgrading fleet. No longer need this model. Buyer responsible for pickup and transport. Jake's finger hovered over the bid button. He had exactly 53 cents in his PayPal account, money he'd scraped together from returning empty bottles. His unemployment benefits had run out last month, and his landlord was making increasingly creative threats about eviction. What did he have to lose? He clicked bid. The auction ended 17 seconds later. Jake won by default. Apparently, he was the only being in the galaxy desperate or stupid enough to bid on a spaceship from Earth. His phone buzzed with a PayPal notification, and suddenly he was the proud owner of an alien spacecraft located somewhere in the Vega system, roughly 25 light-years away. The reality of what he'd done hit him like a cosmic freight train. He owned a spaceship, a real functioning starship. The only problem was retrieving it from an alien merchant on the other side of the galaxy. Jake spent the next 3 hours researching galactic shipping options. The cheapest quote he found was for 847,000 credits, roughly $8 million, just for basic transport to the Sol system. Premium delivery would cost enough to buy a small moon. As dawn broke over his cramped studio apartment, Jake made a decision that would have qualified him for psychiatric evaluation in any reasonable society. He was going to build his own way to get there. The first step was understanding the technology. Jake had dropped out of engineering school, but he'd always been good with his hands and better with jury-rigged solutions. The galactic internet was a treasure trove of technical manuals, most of them poorly translated but functional enough. Hyperspace drives, it turned out, worked on principles that human science was just beginning to grasp. Something about folding spacetime through controlled gravitational manipulation and exotic matter generation. The math made his head hurt, but the basic concept was simple enough. Create a bubble of warped space around your ship and surf the cosmic currents to your destination. The problem was power. Generating a hyperspace field required enough energy to light up half of Nevada for a week. Even if Jake could build the drive components, he had no way to generate that kind of juice. That's when he found the forum post that changed everything, deep in a thread about primitive species integration challenges, an alien engineer named Vloxthar mentioned something called a bootstrap protocol. Apparently, some advanced civilizations had developed emergency rescue beacons for stranded spacers. These beacons could create a temporary hyperspace corridor, but only if the recipient had the right transponder codes and could prove they were in genuine distress. The catch was that the system was designed for aliens with proper galactic citizenship credentials. Humans weren't even supposed to know it existed. Jake stared at the technical specifications until his eyes burned. The transponder wasn't overly complex, mostly exotic materials arranged in specific geometric patterns, powered by what the manual cheerfully called standard fusion cells. The kind of thing that would be routine for any spacefaring civilization, but absolutely impossible for a broke human in a studio apartment. Unless that human was willing to get creative. Jake's neighbor worked at a particle physics lab. His cousin ran the electronics recycling center. His ex-girlfriend's brother had access to a university machine shop and owed Jake a favor from that incident with the campus security footage. For the next 6 weeks, Jake became a man possessed. He learned to pronounce alien technical terms, memorized quantum physics equations he didn't fully understand, and slowly assembled the most sophisticated piece of technology ever built in a human garage. The transponder looked like abstract art, crystalline structures wrapped in copper wire, all contained in a housing made from repurposed satellite components. The fusion cell was actually 3 truck batteries wired in series and connected to a homemade particle accelerator built from spare MRI magnets. It shouldn't have worked. By all rights, Jake's amateur engineering should have produced nothing more than an expensive pile of scrap metal. But human stubbornness has a way of bending the universe to its will. The night Jake finished the device, he sat in his garage looking at 6 weeks of work that had cost him his security deposit, maxed out his credit cards, and probably violated several federal laws. The transponder hummed with barely contained energy, its crystalline components glowing with an eerie blue light that hurt to look at directly. According to the manual, all he had to do was activate the beacon and transmit the proper distress codes. If the system recognized him as a legitimate spacer in need of rescue, it would open a temporary corridor to the nearest registered galactic port. Jake crossed his fingers, said a prayer to whatever cosmic forces might be listening, and flipped the switch. The world exploded into light and sensation beyond human description. Space folded in on itself, reality hiccuped, and Jake found himself standing in what could only be described as the universe's waiting room. The rescue beacon had worked. He was no longer on Earth. Now he just had to figure out how to get to Vega and claim his 50-cent spaceship. Welcome to the galaxy. The celestial transit hub floated in the void between dimensions. A massive structure that defied every law of physics Jake thought he understood. Crystalline towers stretched in impossible directions, connected by bridges that seemed to be made of solidified starlight. Ships of every conceivable design docked at platforms that hung in space without visible support. Jake materialized on what appeared to be a customs platform, his makeshift transponder smoking in his hand. Around him, dozens of alien beings, processed through immigration checkpoints, staffed by creatures that looked like they'd stepped out of his strangest dreams. The nearest immigration officer resembled a walking tree with too many eyes. Its bark-like skin rustled as it turned toward Jake, each eye focusing on him independently in a way that made his stomach lurch. Species designation, it said in a voice like wind through autumn leaves. The universal translator built into the platform rendered the words in perfect English, though Jake could hear the alien syllables underneath. Human, Jake said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Every eye on the tree creature's head swiveled toward him. Processing. Error. Species human not found in galactic registry. Please provide valid designation or present proper documentation. Jake pulled out his passport. I'm from Earth, Sol System, 3rd planet. The creature's bark shifted into what might have been a frown. It consulted a device that looked like a crystal ball filled with swirling galaxies. Sol System. Categorized as pre-contact civilization. Quarantine status active. How did you obtain transport technology? I built it, Jake said simply. The immigration officer's multitude of eyes blinked in sequence, creating a wave effect that was deeply unsettling. You built hyperspace transport technology? Just the transponder. Your rescue beacon system did the heavy lifting. A crowd was gathering. Jake noticed creatures pointing at him with appendages that ranged from tentacles to energy fields. Someone that looked like a metallic spider was taking pictures with a device that hummed and clicked. The tree creature called over a supervisor, a being that appeared to be made entirely of geometric shapes that constantly rearranged themselves. They had a rapid conversation in a language the translator rendered as mathematical equations. Mr. Human, the supervisor said, its voice sounding like a computer trying to be friendly. You're claiming to have accessed our emergency rescue network using primitive technology? If by primitive you mean built in my garage from truck batteries and recycled satellite parts, then yes. The geometric being reshuffled itself into a new configuration. This is unprecedented. Can you demonstrate how your device functions? Jake held up his smoking transponder. It's kind of a one-use thing, unless you've got some spare fusion cells lying around. You powered an emergency transponder with chemical batteries? 3 of them, actually, plus some creative particle acceleration. The crowd around them had grown substantially. Jake overheard fragments of conversation through the translator. Impossible energy ratios. Should have exploded. Typical human stubbornness. Wait, Jake said, focusing on that last comment. You know about humans? The geometric supervisor rearranged into what Jake assumed was an embarrassed configuration. Earth has been monitored. Your species has a reputation for achieving impossible results through what we politely term aggressive improvisation. So you've been watching us? Watching and occasionally placing bets on your survival odds. The current favorite is that you'll either achieve galactic civilization status or accidentally destroy your solar system within the next 50 standard years. Jake decided not to ask what odds his current situation would get. Instead, he explained his predicament, the auction, the spaceship, and his desperate need to reach the Vega system to claim his purchase before the storage fees bankrupted him. The supervisor's geometric components spun thoughtfully. You purchased a Zephyrian scout vessel for half a credit? 50 cents, yeah. From someone called Kethvar. Kethvar the merchant. The same Kethvar who once sold a broken hyperspace engine to the Galactic Navy as a vintage collectible. Jake's stomach dropped. Is that bad? Kethvar is ethically flexible, but his ships are usually functional. Mostly. The tree creature immigration officer rustled nervously. Sir, what do we do with him? Technically, he's here illegally. His species lacks proper documentation, and his transport method violates approximately 47 safety regulations. However, the supervisor noted, he did successfully navigate our emergency rescue protocols, which requires a functional understanding of galactic law, and his improvised technology, while crude, demonstrates engineering principles that shouldn't be possible for a pre-contact civilization. Jake sensed an opportunity. Look, I know I'm probably breaking a bunch of rules just by being here, but all I want is to get to Vega, pick up my ship, and go home. I'm not trying to cause any diplomatic incidents or anything. The supervisor's shapes locked into a new pattern. Mr. Human, I'm going to make you an offer. The Galactic Council has been debating whether humanity is ready for first contact. Your presence here, achieved through pure determination and questionable engineering, might serve as an interesting test case. What kind of test? We'll provide you with temporary transit permits and basic galactic citizenship credentials. In exchange, you allow us to document your journey and report back on human adaptability to galactic civilization. Jake considered his options. He could try to find another way to Vega, assuming such a thing existed. He could attempt to build another transponder, assuming he could find the materials and not die in the process. Or he could accept help from beings who apparently considered his entire species an entertaining science experiment. Do I get to keep my ship when this is over? Assuming Kethvar hasn't sold it to someone else in the meantime, yes. And I can go home afterward? With a full report on human potential for galactic integration, yes. Jake thought about his empty apartment, his unpaid bills, and his complete lack of career prospects on Earth. Then he looked around at the impossible architecture of the transit hub, at the dozens of alien species going about their daily business among the stars. All right, he said, let's see where this goes. The supervisor reconfigured into what Jake hoped was approval. Excellent. First, we need to get you proper documentation. Then we'll arrange transport to Vega. Fair warning, the local customs there can be challenging for newcomers. How challenging? Let's just say you might want to brush up on your negotiation skills and possibly invest in some body armor. Jake grinned despite himself. 3 days ago, his biggest problem had been affording ramen noodles. Now he was apparently about to become humanity's unofficial ambassador to the galaxy. It beat unemployment by a pretty wide margin. One human's trash. The Vega system turned out to be a trader's paradise with dozens of planets, moons, and space stations all dedicated to the fine art of buying, selling, and occasionally stealing anything that could be moved from one place to another. Kethvar's operation was located on an asteroid called Bargain Basin, which Jake thought was either refreshingly honest or deeply ominous. The merchant himself was even more unsettling in person than his profile picture suggested. 8 tentacles sprouted from a central body mass that wore what appeared to be a 3-piece suit made of liquid mercury. His eyes were compound affairs that tracked Jake's movement like a predator watching particularly stupid prey. Ah, the human. Kethvar's voice bubbled through a translation matrix that made him sound like he was talking underwater. I was wondering when you would arrive to collect your purchase. They stood in what Kethvar generously called his showroom, a pressurized cavern carved into the asteroid's core. Ships of every description hung from the ceiling or sat on platforms, ranging from sleek fighters to massive cargo haulers that looked like flying cities. So where's my ship? Jake asked, trying not to stare at a vessel that appeared to be grown rather than built. Ah yes, your ship. Kethvar's tentacles writhed in what Jake hoped was amusement rather than hunger. "Follow me." They weaved through the showroom, past ships that hummed with barely contained energy, and others that looked like they'd been built from spare parts and good intentions. Kethvar kept up a running commentary on his inventory, praising the fine qualities of vessels that clearly hadn't been fine for several decades. Finally, they arrived at a platform in the back corner where Jake's purchase sat under a tarp that had seen better centuries. "Behold," Kethvar announced, whipping away the covering with a theatrical flourish. "One genuine Zephyrian scout vessel, model year approximately 2,000 standard cycles ago." Jake's heart sank. The ship looked like it had been through a war, lost badly, and then been used for target practice. The hull was pockmarked with holes, the blue sheen visible only in patches where the metal wasn't corroded. One of the landing struts was missing entirely, leaving the vessel listing at an alarming angle. "This thing actually flies?" Jake asked. "Oh, certainly. The hyperspace drive is fully functional. The life support systems work adequately, and the molecular assembler only occasionally creates toxic waste instead of food." Jake walked around the ship, noting the creative patchwork of different metals that comprised most of the hull. Someone had welded what looked like kitchen appliances over several breaches, and the airlock door was held shut with what appeared to be duct tape. "You know what?" Jake said, surprising himself. "I'll take it." Kethvar's compound eyes refracted in what Jake was learning to recognize as surprise. "You will?" "I mean, of course you will. Excellent choice. Would you like to purchase extended warranty coverage?" "I'll pass." Jake ran his hand along the ship's hull, feeling the vibration of systems that somehow still functioned despite decades of neglect. "How do I get it off the asteroid?" "Well, technically that's your responsibility, though I could arrange transport to the nearest shipping facility for a modest fee of only 50,000 credits. Jake did some quick math in his head. 50,000 credits was roughly the GDP of a small country. "I think I'll figure something else out." What he figured out was that the ship, despite its appearance, actually could fly. The Zephyrian engineering was solid enough that even decades of abuse hadn't compromised the essential systems. The hyperspace drive hummed to life with an energy signature that made Jake's teeth ache. The life support systems began processing the asteroid's thin atmosphere into something breathable, and the ship's computer came online with a cheerful chime. The molecular assembler was, indeed, somewhat unreliable. Jake's first attempt at creating water resulted in a substance that glowed faintly green and tasted like regret. His second attempt worked perfectly, which he chose to interpret as a good omen. The ship's AI was a remnant from the original Zephyrian crew, a personality matrix that introduced itself as Zix and seemed perpetually surprised to still exist. "New crew detected," Zix announced as Jake settled into the pilot's chair. "Species unknown. Please state your designation and intended mission parameters." "I'm human, and my mission is to not die while figuring out how this thing works." "Human?" The AI paused for what seemed like database consultation. "No reference found. Analyzing speech patterns, cultural markers, technological familiarity. Assessment: you are either a very unusual Zephyrian or a member of a primitive species with delusions of competence. Thanks. I think? Question: how did you acquire this vessel? Previous owner's records indicate sale to desperate biped with questionable judgment. Jake decided he liked Kethvar less with each passing moment. "I bought it fair and square. Now can you teach me to fly this thing?" What followed was the most intensive crash course in starship operation that Jake could have imagined. Zephyrian controls were designed for beings with 4 arms and the ability to think in 11 dimensions simultaneously. Jake had to jury-rig most of the interfaces and rely heavily on the ship's automated systems. Launching from Bargain Basin turned out to be the easy part. The ship lifted off with surprising grace, its repaired hull holding together despite ominous creaking sounds from the areas held together with kitchen appliances. The hard part came when Jake tried to set course for Earth. The ship's navigation computer insisted that Sol was a restricted system, access forbidden to unauthorized vessels. Jake's temporary galactic citizenship credentials weren't sufficient to override the lockout. That's when Zix made an observation that changed everything. Curiosity. Your species demonstrates typical human problem-solving patterns. You know about humans. Cross-referencing, yes. Your species is flagged in galactic databases as potential hazard. Aggressive improvisation tendency. There are extensive files on human engineering methodologies. Are you saying we have a reputation out here? Indeed, humans are noted for achieving impossible results through application of insufficiently tested theories and excessive determination. Also for creating surprisingly effective technology from inappropriate materials. Jake thought about his garage-built transponder, about the duct tape holding his ship together, about everything that had led to this moment. Zix, what if I told you I could probably override the navigation restrictions? I would advise against any modifications to core systems. What if I told you I'm going to do it anyway? I would request permission to back up my personality matrix to a secure location. 3 hours later, Jake had successfully convinced the ship's computer that Earth was actually a previously undiscovered planet in the Tau Ceti system, that his credentials had been updated through unofficial channels, and that the navigation restrictions were the result of a clerical error. The computer accepted these obviously false statements because Jake had programmed them using techniques he'd learned fixing his grandmother's printer. As the ship jumped to hyperspace, tearing a hole in reality through sheer bloody-minded determination, Zix made one final observation. Note for log. Human solution to navigation restrictions involved creative interpretation of database architecture, unauthorized modification of core programming, and what can only be described as weaponized optimism. Does it work? Jake asked, watching the stars streak past in patterns that hurt to look at. Against all probability, yes. Estimated arrival at Sol system, 14 hours. Jake leaned back in the pilot's chair of his 50-cent starship, watching the universe bend around them as they surfed the cosmic currents toward home. He thought about his empty apartment, his unpaid bills, and his complete lack of career prospects. Then he thought about Zix's personality matrix, about Zephyrian engineering principles, and about the molecular assembler that was currently attempting to create pizza from base atomic elements. Maybe unemployment wasn't such a problem after all. Maybe he had just found humanity's entry point to the galaxy.